one of the things that we have to deal with quite often is the multifunction hall that churches and places like that often have. It's not their main auditorium, but it's a place that all sorts of other activities take place in. And recently we did some work on a church that had one of these in Christchurch, and I thought we'd look at it today and just talk about what we did there and why, and the results that came out of it. This is called the Roberton Hall, and it's part of St Christopher's Anglican Church in Avonhead, Christchurch. So some of you may be aware of the church, some of you may have been in there. This room, this Roberton Hall, was upgraded and redecorated. It had formerly been the church sanctuary. That quite a few years ago built a much bigger sanctuary, and this is in between the original old church building and the new church building. So it's a space that gets used for all sorts of things. The whole area was opened up and the walls were repainted, the ceiling was repainted, and finally the last step was that the floors were fully polished, as it would give them a nice space to do carpet bowls and other things like that. Unfortunately, once they'd done that, they found the space unusable. There was just so much reverberation, so much liveliness in the room, that conversation face to face up close was even difficult, and at any distance it was completely impossible. And then when they had morning and afternoon teas, lunches, things like that in that space, the noise levels were just incredible and unpleasant for people to be in. So it was a space that wasn't working as they wanted it to, and they needed to do something about it. The ceiling was gibboard. The three of the walls of the room were concrete block, and the fourth wall was a mixture of wood panelling and fibreboard or Pinex. So, and the floor, as I mentioned, was polished tongue and groove timber. Step one, find out what you're dealing with and actually do a measurement. So we measure the reverberation time, and if you look at the graph here, this is the before measurement of reverberation time. You'll see that in the low frequencies it's just under 2.5 seconds. The mid frequencies were down to 2.1 seconds, and up at the high end we're getting down to close to 1 second. The space was just not really usable, and so we needed to plan some acoustic treatment for the room, something that would tame that room down and make it a pleasant place to be in, easy to talk in and communicate in. Sometimes we get asked with clients, can we just put carpet on the walls? Will that help? Yes, but it's not recommended. Carpet's a thin product. It's going to absorb the highest frequencies, but it's not going to do well at the middle frequencies and absolutely nothing at the low frequencies. It's just too thin. Another thing, carpet's designed to go on floors, not onto walls, and it doesn't have an appropriate fire rating for wall use, and so for that reason it's not recommended as well. What we need is something thicker, something that's actually going to have some absorption depth in it, that's going to actually do something in the middle frequencies and even down to the lowest end of the speech range. So we proposed 100mm thick broadband absorber modules be constructed and fitted to the walls, and we would give them provide the design, and it was something that a handyman in the church would be able to do. The frame would be MDF, the rear of the panel would be MDF, and it would be filled with 250mm layers of either semi-rigid fiberglass, the yellow fiberglass board, or compressed polyester 50mm fibre panels. Sometimes these are called Nova Hush duct liner, and it's a nice product to work with. Finally, a fabric would be wrapped around the panel and it would be fitted to the walls. Here's a photograph of the room before treatment. You can see the polish on the floors, you can see the concrete walls and the hard ceiling, and it's understandable why it needs some treatment. Really important for there to be some treatment at ear level in the room, and stretching upwards into the space where there would be a lot of reflections happening. One of the other things that would be happening in this room would be echoes. Between parallel hard surfaces you're going to have sound bouncing backwards and forwards, and if it's repeatedly bouncing backwards and forwards we call those flutter echoes, and they're quite destructive to communication, to clear speech and things like that. To prevent that we need to get some scattering of sound happening, some diffusion. In this room I'm sitting in right here and now, we've got a specific diffusion panel behind me, and that really helps scatter sound, but they're a bit expensive for church use. But when you look at the plans for this room, which is this drawing you see now, you'll see there's actually long vertical absorber modules on the end walls of the room, and these will have a lot of transitions between hard and soft and edges on them, and that really helps with scattering sound as well. So that's one reason why that shape of absorber was chosen for the end walls, to deal with the long echo you would get up and down the room. One of the things we needed to do was to get treatment right around the room. On all 4 walls we've got treatment. Sometimes we find acousticians recommending that a treatment be applied to the ceiling, and that'll help with the floor bounce echo problem or reflections, but it's not going to treat the horizontal sound, and a lot of the sound that's going to originate in the room is travelling in the horizontal direction, and this is the plane that our ears are in as well, so this is why it's really important to treat these. Here's a graph of the after treatment reverberation time. You'll see that it's much nicer shape of graph, and that the peak reverberation is just over 1 second. This is a much easier space to speak in. It's a much more pleasant space to be in than the previous graph you saw, and the comments that we got once the treatment had been done, and the work was done by just a handyman in the church. The comments we got was that it was really pleasant to be in. They'd had a lunch in there just the day or a couple of days before I went in to take these measurements, and I was being told that the difference was chalk and cheese. It was like night and day. They were very happy with the money they'd spent and the work they'd done and the way it had worked out. Finally, here's a photograph of the room with the treatment in place, and you're looking down the room. If you looked in the opposite direction, you've got the same treatment on the opposite wall, and it's still just as usable as it was before treatment. The difference is that now it's actually pleasant to be in, it's easy to talk, it's easy to hear, it's just a totally transformed space. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was safety and putting carpet on the walls. Safety is always an issue in a public building, and so choice of materials, choice of fabrics, and all these things need to be chosen, and to make sure that you're not increasing the fire risk and the health risk to people. For this reason, foam absorbers have to be looked at very carefully. A lot of the polyurethane foams that are used in things like mattresses have a very poor fire rating and a very toxic gas release, so they're not a product that we advocate or use. There are a few foams that are made of different base materials that can be used. Generally they're rather expensive and reserved for studio applications. If you've got a problem room, if you've got a space like this that needs attention, step one is to get an assessment done, get some measurements done to find out what the extent of the problem is and how much treatment it needs, and from that we can see what type of a treatment and how much treatment is needed to fix a room. So step one, assess, and then get a plan to work to, and usually a handyman can construct the modules. We can get commercially made modules done in Auckland and places like that, usually 3 or 4 times the cost of making them yourself. The finish will be superb, and they'll be easy to install and operate with. It's just depends on your budget which way you want to go, but if we can help, give us a call. Thank you.